The recount and the legislative scramble to make Jill Stein pay for the whole thing. The fascination with fake news. Dan Gilbert goes to Lansing, and headlines will get you up to speed. Stay with us. My Week starts right now.
Did you know Gordon Food Service was started by a 23-year-old entrepreneur as a butter and egg delivery business more than a century ago? In 1948, school teacher Gerard Wendell Hayworth borrowed $10,000 from his parents to start a woodworking operation in his family's garage. It's now Hayworth Incorporated. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hi there and welcome to My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much for joining us. You know, we should all be experts in recount law by now. Donald Trump has been named Person of the Year by Time magazine, and no, that is not a fake news article. It's what we are talking about on My Week. So coming up for you, the recount has been stopped. What did we learn and why Michigan lawmakers want to make Jill Stein pay for the entire thing? Plus, speaking of Lansing, lame duck lawmakers scrap plans for major public pension reforms and complicated tax breaks, even after investor Dan Gilbert paid them a visit. Can they be revived in 2017? Also coming up, if I read it on the internet, it must be true. Why people are falling for so-called fake news. And we will get to some headlines for you, like Ben Carson's HUD appointment. It is all coming up. So let's dive into the recount. Not only did we all get schooled in state versus federal law, we also saw a lot of reasons why some precincts couldn't be counted, but not the voter fraud Jill Stein says she was looking for. And there's still the possibility Stein could pay for the recount if Michigan lawmakers pass a bill that they are working on in Lansing. Let's bring in our contributors tonight. Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Hey, guys.
Hey.
How are you?
Good to see you.
All right. So the recount was incredibly complicated and constantly changing. And I really did feel for all the reporters of both your papers who had to sit there and wait for the refresh and at all hours as well, too.
Zach Gorchow from Gongor News said he wrote a story 10 different times on Wednesday night or Tuesday night because of the way that things changed. I mean, it really was fast moving, and it was, you know, late in the news cycle at least.
We can't say for sure where it even stands now, can we? I
mean, as of right now, when we're taping, it's off. But
then the Supreme Court's got to weigh
in. That could change that, I suppose. I don't think they will, but boy, it's been hard to.
You don't think the state Supreme Court will weigh in?
Well, the federal court said it's off now.
Done.
But the appeals court, you could take the appeals court decision. You could take that to the state Supreme Court, and I thought that's.
Oh, I see. Yeah, you could do that.
All right. So what have we learned from all this? And again, you know, when we talked last week, and you had spoken to Jill Stein, who said, you know, this is not the recount to change the result, but the recount to find if there's any kind of voter fraud here. I think what we ended up seeing was a lot of, we can't recount this precinct because someone put duct tape on the box of ballots.
It's very clear the issue in Michigan is not voter fraud; it's incompetence in the electoral process, and this has revealed some very troubling things about what goes on amongst the agencies that are supposed to be counting our vote. You look at a third of the vote in Wayne County can't be recounted because of irregularities in breaking the seals on the containers, of the number of ballots not matching the number of people who voted. When you talk about disenfranchising voters, bureaucratic incompetence and bungling has disenfranchised more voters than Jim Crow did. This is terrible.
What do you think? Do you agree with that, Stephen?
No, of course, certainly not more than Jim Crow, which disenfranchised everybody who was African American. But it is a big problem, and you have clerks like the clerk of the city of Detroit who I think have to answer now for the way that they are running elections. Are they prepared enough? Do they have enough resources? Do they have the technology that will help them, you know, make sure that everybody votes the way they should? The stories out of Detroit on election day were pretty harrowing in terms of long lines, in terms of people showing up and finding that machines were broken or jammed. And the problem with that is that Janice Winfrey, who's the clerk, we never hear her come up and say before an election, hey, I need some help, I need more money, or I need more people, or these machines are not going to work on election day. And that really is her job. She is to be the advocate for the voters, and the city, I think would be willing to help, or maybe the state. I'm not sure how much help she could get, but you never hear her say this is broken and we need to fix it. And she's got to
Well,
start
until
doing that.
after. I mean, she's been alibying all week about machinery and this, but they're finding incidents when they're opening these containers of ballots that have notes written on them by the poll workers. This person didn't vote in the district court rate, for example. Those ballots should not be touched or tampered with after they've put in that scanner and go into this sealed box.
Yeah,
And,
I mean, a lot of
and
it is
voters
also
go out and stand in line for all of this time, and then poll workers spoil their ballot. I mean, there's something wrong with that.
I think what also has been interesting is this move by the legislature to say, well, why don't we retroactively get a law to make sure that Jill Stein pays for the whole thing instead of the partial, the $900,000
Well, they
that she
feel
paid.
they have an legal avenue where they can do that. I think that sort of retroactive legislating rarely holds up in court. They feel they can do it. And on one hand, I think it's probably not going to hold up. On the other hand, I think if you ask for a frivolous recount, which is what this was, the taxpayers in these counties shouldn't bear the cost.
Well,
What do you think?
But so the problem is with the word frivolous. The law doesn't have any description that would allow you to apply a legal standard to that word. So her request for a recount doesn't look any different than anybody else's, and it wasn't treated any differently. And so if they pass this law, it's a pretty clear equal protection violation that would get overturned in federal court.
But
sure, and it would waste a lot of our time.
As they look for remedies, I think if you've lost the election 99% to 1%, you probably shouldn't be able to put the taxpayers through the expense of a
I would
recount.
argue the other side. I would argue that anybody should be able to ask for a recount because there shouldn't be a problem reaffirming the fact that votes were cast and counted. I don't think there's
Then you
anything
should be
wrong with
prepared to
that.
pay for it. The taxpayers of these counties who can barely buy good equipment for their people to vote on shouldn't be asked to take all of these hundreds of thousands
we
of
See,
don't
dollars.
then, are you
for
opening counties across the state up to serious
If you look
financial
at,
loss
if you
there?
look at other states and the way they deal with recounts, first of all, they're a little more lax than Michigan is in terms of how they do it. They're also way more forgiving in terms of some of the errors that we're seeing ballots discounted for in Michigan that wouldn't happen in other states. I mean, here again, we're a backwater on this kind of stuff. We're a backwater on the way we let people vote. We don't have early voting. We don't have same-day registration. We have nothing that other states
we do still
are doing
have-
to try to make sure that the franchise is protected.
We still do have paper ballots, and I think that's a good thing because when a recount is necessary,
they're counted by
you
machine.
have, not in this case, I mean, not the recount.
The recount.
The recount was
Recount's
by
going
hand.
So you do have something you can recount. In other states, it's electronic,
that's a
and this
problem in
whole
some
issue
states,
of
too.
hacking becomes into play where it doesn't in Michigan.
All right, well, hey, speaking of Lansing, the lame duck agenda took a turn this week. Lawmakers seem to have dropped pension reform and a package of tax incentives. Investor Dan Gilbert personally lobbied for the tax breaks this week, and the bill would have allowed developers to keep up to $50 million a year in sales income taxes from future projects built on brownfield sites. The bills died in the House late this week, much to Gilbert's disappointment, who said it could change the scope of some of his proposed projects. And I thought it was also interesting. He said, well, I think I learned a lot about civics and government this week.
Doesn't work the way you think it
So
does.
Nolan, let me start with you. Did he go to Lansing thinking, wow, this is going to be pretty easy for me?
Well, let's start by saying this wasn't just Gilbert going to Lansing. For the first time, the sort of Detroit business community mimicked what Grand Rapids has been doing for years, and they went together. Chris Ilitch, Peter Cummings, others, they went to Lansing together. This sort of bore Gilbert's name, but this was a group effort, and that's what I think swayed the governor. That's what impressed the governor. It's something he's been urging them to do for a long time. They finally did it. They brought up, I thought, a innovative package. It was limited in its scope. It required a lot of skin in the game from the developers. It wasn't just simply throwing mega grants around like we've done in the past. They had the votes in the legislature. They said they just couldn't get it out of the committee because Kevin Cotter didn't want it to come out of committee. And he has been probably the governor's worst friend in the legislature throughout these last
You know, and he did say
4
about this, he
years.
said if Dan Gilbert can't do this project without these tax breaks, then maybe the project isn't
Well,
worth
the
doing.
truth is, in Detroit is still a place where where return on investment isn't guaranteed by the amount of rent you can charge. It's a city that was disinvested in for a long time. You got these brownfield sites sitting there that are going to take a lot more money than building out here on a field in the suburbs. It is reasonable to ask for some assistance to get those buildings up and going.
I think what was interesting, though, is I saw a headline this week that would these incentives exacerbate the idea of two Detroits, where, again, you have a lot of investment development in the downtown and nothing like that in the neighborhood.
I think you always have to be mindful of that, but we always look at that as an either or. We're either going to invest in downtown or we're going to invest in the neighborhoods, and I think we have to stop thinking that way. Downtown still needs investment. As Nolan pointed out, there is still this hurdle to market rate development of these old buildings that we have let sit for a long time and need more work than they should. And sometimes, in this case, you're talking about brownfield developments where there are extraordinary circumstances that prevent it. That shouldn't be juxtaposed against what we need to do in the neighborhoods. I mean, the neighborhoods need far more investment, I would argue, than downtown does at this point. And I think what people are saying is, if you're going to do this for developers downtown, what's the corollary look like in the neighborhoods? When does this get to those of us who sit out in neighborhoods that have not seen any investment yet or any reinvestment yet? When does that come online? One thing that's really interesting here, though, is you saw Kevin Cotter sort of aping far left politics here. He could join with some of the activists in Detroit who've said the same thing. Why, if you can't do this stuff with your own money, then maybe it shouldn't get done at all.
Well, then Detroit just sits there under that argument. I mean, the question isn't two Detroits, it's no Detroit. I mean, and I think that the development in Detroit and the developers who are coming to Detroit are probably providing more benefit to the neighborhoods than if they hadn't come in. You look at what Peter Cummings is doing.
I think that's hard to say.
In picking neighborhoods to go along with, and I think that's going to become sort of the model, the norm. And it's a whole city, even though it has different parts. Right. And if you boost downtown, you're already seeing spin-offs in the near term.
Let me ask you this then. So what about this deal needs to be changed, or what can be changed so that it is more palatable in the legislature?
The first thing that's going to change is that Kevin Cotter is not going to be there.
And that was the problem. He had the votes. I mean, the votes were there. The votes, even in this local government committee, they had the majority Republicans they needed to move this out, and Cotter still pulled it. So this wasn't a matter of fundamental flaws in the legislation.
One of the things I would start doing with these kind of things, and I would start doing with all of the conversations we have about downtown development, is putting in explicit things that are targeted for neighborhoods. When people see legislation like this that only benefits big developers downtown, there is no way to convince them that this benefits the city. And frankly, if you go to their neighborhoods, you wouldn't be able to convince them either, because you can look around and see all of the things that are not working still, all the opportunity that is still passing them by. I think you have to start talking about these things in concert and saying, okay, we're going to do this, and this is for downtown, but we're also going to do this. We're going to, send a portion of this money to the schools, or we're going to.
So every large project has to have something side attached to it.
I think that's a better way to manage these things, to make sure that people don't get left behind.
Well, the idea is to make these more market sensible rather than less so, and I think this legislation did exactly what it needed to do. It was very selective, very targeted. It was benefit not just Detroit, but cities all over the state, and it required the developers to commit to a certain level of money going in the ground before they got anything. This wasn't a flaw in the legislation. It was a flaw in the legislature and the Speaker of the House.
Well, getting the deal done. All right, we'll see if that comes back around in 2017. So if you thought links to crazy fake news stories on your Facebook page were pretty harmless, well, think again. We've entered an age where more people are believing exactly what they read online, regardless of the source, with dangerous consequences, like in D.C. this week. They're perpetuating the cycle by passing that story along to other friends. And I find this interesting. interesting because we've talked about this, especially in light of the election, before the election and afterwards. And it seems to have gained speed. So I want to have just a larger conversation with both of you guys who are in the news business about fake news. And starting off, first off, should we be calling it fake news?
Well, if it's fake, we should. If it's something we don't agree with,
Instead of just like an urban legend or a total, total lie, or I mean.
The problem with the internet's a wonderful thing, and it's bringing information to people, more information to people than they've ever had before. But there's no hierarchy of credibility on the internet. You hit Google, and the Free Press, the news might come up, and then some, joesbasement.com might come up same time, and people have, it's no way of knowing or no way of discerning, little way of discerning what's credible and what's not credible. It's all there on the same screen. They treat it all the same. They treat Wikipedia as if it's an encyclopedia that's been vetted and
it's funny that my kids' teachers tell them it is not a source. Like you can start down the path by getting a couple of things, but that is not a source.
I mean, if you think about what's really, I guess what really seems like it's happening here is that the technology here has far outpaced the sort of maturity of the information culture, and so.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well,
maturity of the information culture.
So people's habits in the way they digest information, the way they seek out information, is still very much in an older mode where there wasn't as much need to question the credibility, because the things that you could get your hands on in mass distribution were all handled by professionals who upheld a certain standard, or for the most part. I mean, you always had tabloids and the National Enquirer, but people knew those things were fake. Now you've got a much bigger media landscape, which, as Nolan points out, is a great thing, but people are still using that old model of looking at things and saying, well, why isn't Joe's Basement just as credible as the New York Times? I mean, there's not that question that enters their mind. The question that does enter their mind, unfortunately, is, does this reinforce what I already think? Does this?
That's what I was going to say. People are seeking out probably information that bolsters what their beliefs already are, and it makes them feel good about what beliefs they have. They say, see, this backs it up. Let me ask you, Nolan, how difficult does fake news, or this era that we've kind of entered into where credibility is being given out freely, I guess, how difficult does it make it to do your job?
Well, I mean,
or for people to take what you do seriously.
You just do what you do.
No one
I
takes
think.
what we do seriously.
Well, see, I try to take what you guys do seriously.
That line between information and entertainment is so blurred now. You have comedy shows that sort of purport to be news shows, and it's harder and harder. We're not doing our readers and our viewers any favor with all of that. So, I mean, we contributed to it somewhat ourselves, but in the old days, I mean, it took a considerable investment to be a news outlet.
Right.
You either had to buy a station and satellites or a printing press and all of that. I mean, there was a considerable investment. Now it's a computer and a modem and boom, or even a phone and a modem and boom. You're a journalist, you're a news outlet, you're a website.
Do you feel that the credibility of, what would you say, mainstream news outlets people have started to question so much that they're now putting you almost on the same plane as other outlets? I guess you can call them fly by night.
Yeah, I think people, there are lots of people who genuinely believe that there is no difference between the newsroom of the New York Times and a political site that is full of people who believe one thing and maybe are not really journalists, but are putting out information that reinforces that point of view. I mean, I think that line is absolutely gone in a lot of people's minds. How does it come back into focus? I'm not sure. But we've always seen this sort of leap of technology, sort of outpacing consumer information habits. I mean, you go back to the printing press and the radio and the television. They all cause these same ripples. It's just that the internet is much bigger.
Well,
I think it's interesting too that people are also they're trying to be the first one to share it as well. I think that's has also been interesting to watch how people they see a headline
They're
and they
control
don't
of
even
it,
go
yeah.
into maybe the whole story and they go, well, I'm going to share this or I'm going to pass this along
most
to
of the
Aunt
things people
Linda.
share on Twitter, they don't actually read themselves. But
Well, there's danger in that.
We've got to be mindful of maintaining our own standards and our own credibility. I think a lot of the media hurt itself in this last election. You saw the examples of mainstream media outlets appearing to collaborate with the campaigns and the candidates. We've got to be very watchful of our own, to keep our own biases out of the news. It's more important than ever. We can't chase those sites that Steve mentioned. We can't do that, or we forfeit all that we've built.
You think about the image that on election night that I will never get out of my mind of watching CNN, which has now this two-sided panel.
It's like 12 people
12
lined
people
up.
up there, but they have people who've worked in the campaigns, people who've worked for the parties, and other operatives sitting next to people who do research, like data research for them. And they're all speaking in turn without any sort of filter as to, well, this person's
context.
Yeah, right. This person's pushing an agenda, and that's their job. But this person is a journalist who's doing research. I mean, you're right that we, as the media, are helping to blur that line. And I feel like cable news is doing a worse job of it. I mean, you don't see that in newspapers because the medium doesn't really lend itself.
No, but
you know, I
started to see some of that in this campaign, where even in print sites, even in our side of the business, people were crossing
lines they shouldn't.
and they shouldn't do it. But you also have, Christy, this whole idea of the aggregators, the people like Google and Yahoo influencing the news with how
When you search something and what comes
they
up,
have
yeah.
tremendous power to influence public opinion in a way that I think we should be worried about. And politicians starting their own websites and purporting them to be news sites.
You know,
it's a very dangerous
I think it's
world.
interesting, and just to kind of wrap it up and pick up on something that you said too, there's also something different, I believe, with cable news and television news in terms of in print, and with TV, there's so much more time to fill, and that's why it's easy sometimes to start, you see those blurring of the lines a little bit between reporting, data, and analyst, and it starts to blur a little bit. We're going to talk about this. We're going to do a whole show in the next couple of weeks talking about the state of journalism, reporting, and kind of where we all stand and what we need to do to serve the public maybe a little bit better in the next coming months. So hang on for that, but time now for some headlines. No.
I thought we were talking about
No. We're going to talk about something else. Stephen's like, did we go over in time? I'm
over
like,
time.
no, I got it. We got time.
Guy wants an hour.
We still got time. Ben Carson's going to be the head of HUD, and Trump is Times Person of the Year. I'm gonna crumble that up and throw that out to the center of the table for you guys.
Ben Carson's not the worst nominee we've seen, but that just means he's better than Linda McMahon or Betsy DeVos.
What do you nominate Linda McMahon
for
Small
SBA?
business, right? Small business.
She's gonna run the SBA.
Oh, I think that's wonderful.
Okay.
Wait a minute. Why do you think that's wonderful? Come on, Nolan.
From one reality TV star to another. I think
So
it's
I
terrific.
think with Carson, Ben Carson is a really fascinating person. I actually got to know him a little bit when I worked in Baltimore because he was at Hopkins, and he's a brilliant surgeon and all of that. But he's also he's got a really interesting story. He's got a really interesting background. I'm not wild about this nomination because I don't think he's qualified for it. But I do think he will bring a perspective to HUD that might help cities like Detroit. But we'll have to see. I mean, I'm not signing off on that yet.
20 seconds, Nolan. His attention to detail as a surgeon, could it translate?
I don't think those skills translate, but he was one of the most loyal of the Republican candidates who Trump vanquished, loyal to the candidate. And it's not uncommon for presidents to reward that kind of loyalty. He's clearly a smart man. I think he's clearly mission focused, and I think he may surprise us.
Can you name
All right.
another president who's made a nomination like this?
Well, I wasn't crazy about Barack Obama nominating activists and academics to all of his positions.
People who actually
we'll
had
see.
experience in the field?
Hey, and we're going to start.
Experience talking about it.
Well,
We're
it's
going to
doing
start
it,
round
working.
2, second fight after the show. That's going to do it for MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining us. Catch up with us anytime. MiWeek.org and on Facebook and Twitter. We will see you next time. No fake news here. Take care.